Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to have you with us on this Sunday afternoon here on Florida's Space Coast. We're currently just shy of an hour away from SpaceX preparing to launch its latest Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40, Slick 40, there at the Cape. If you've noticed our social channels a little bit earlier on in the day, we posted about the weather outlook, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail here in just a moment, but not the most stellar of days when it comes to launching a Falcon 9 rocket potentially. Rain pushing through across parts of Brevard County, where the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station are located. Conditions dry for now on the area of the Space Coast near the launch pad, though. Team is bracing to quickly wrap the cameras should that change. You'll notice some wind in the area as well. We'll delve a little bit more into the weather considerations since it's an important part of today's launch story. But before we get too much farther, I want to acknowledge the team that's making today's launch opportunity possible. First off, I want to thank the more than 1,100 of you who are watching with us live this afternoon. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button, share the stream, allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as well. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast today, alongside newest member of our team, John Pisani, who's sitting, let's say, co-pilot in the technical operations chair, as it were, here at the press site. Our photographer, Adam Bernstein, out and about, making sure all the cameras are pointing in the right direction and focus, and ready to track the Falcon 9 if it's able to lift off today against some potentially challenging weather conditions. The photographer, Michael Kane, has this launch off, but we'll see him in action when it comes to launch attempt coming up tomorrow for the crewed Fram-2 flight. We'll talk more about that later on in the broadcast today. But if you're not following the fellas here on X, you can find them at their handles. Adam is at aburn NYC. Michael is at MD Kane Jr. John is at John Pisani Photo. Be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. For those of you who may not have been with us for some of our recent launch and static fire coverage, John, still with the fine folks at Cosmic Perspective, but when it comes to operations over here on the East Coast, he's working with our team now when it comes to Falcon 9 and eventually down the road, Falcon Heavy launches as well. We'll also be joined a little bit later on the broadcast for tracking views, assuming a good launch later, by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, as well as Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions. I want to thank our moderators in the live chat for holding it down, helping us out here. Thanks to Callistia Lee and to Rick Donner, Mark Otto, believe I saw Jeff Hansen earlier, Astro Joe, a lot of the gang hanging out with us today. If you see any of the other moderators who I didn't name check, cruise on in to the live chat, be sure to give them a big old hello. You can help our moderators out by simply following the rules of the chat. That is, refrain from delving into overt politics. Also, we'd ask that you not use the all caps function when you type in your messages. Converse in English so that our moderators can respond appropriately, and also be respectful to one another. These live launch broadcasts are made possible by our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like John Boy, the Rocket Girl, of course, all of our moderators, Debbie Lane, Diane Thomas, David Hulk, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Speaking of channel members, want to welcome in our newest channel member, Susanna Dunnington, joining us with membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Susan, or Susanna, pardon me. Also want to thank moderator channel member Clistia Lee for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity, Clistia, for growing our community here. And to our 10 newest channel members, welcome aboard to each and every one of you. We're very glad to have you with us. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Clistia in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership beyond the month you were just gifted. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space and spaceflight, you can follow the lead of channel member Gunnar S by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. And not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated. To that end, want to thank channel member Gunnar S for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that, Gunnar. Good to see you this afternoon, and thanks for the support at that level. Also want to thank someone who I'm always happy to see pop into the live chat, my mother, Mary Robinson, who says hello from rainy California. Well, it seems like both coasts are dealing with their share of rainfall today. I suppose the benefit out west is California can always use the rain, and out here we could certainly hope that it goes away enough in time for a launch in about 52 minutes and some change. Of course, SpaceX has multiple backup opportunities within any given Starlink launch window, as long as it has not begun fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. Currently targeting a T0 liftoff at 3:25 p.m. Eastern. It is 1925 UTC for those around the world. (12:25 p.m. Pacific for those out on the west coast of the United States. If SpaceX hasn't begun the fueling process, its backup opportunities for this mission extend out to 7:10 p.m. Eastern. So just this side of Monday from the UTC perspective. If none of those opportunities pan out, it does have another backup opportunity available on Monday, March 31st, with a new launch window that would open up at 2:57 p.m. Eastern. Again, that's only if they are unable to launch today. Given that the weather is playing a significant role in this launch opportunity today, let's go ahead and focus on that for a moment here. For those who didn't have a chance to read the launch preview article, which we have up on our website right now, spaceflightnow.com, if you want to peruse that during this broadcast. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast yesterday just a 20% chance of favorable weather conditions at liftoff, citing a number of concerns, potentially violations of the cumulus cloud rule, the anvil cloud rule, and the surface electric fields rule. Some of the primary considerations for the meteorologists at the 45th Weather Squadron is to help ensure that launch goes off safely, part of which is making sure that a rocket, in this case the Falcon 9, doesn't pass through clouds in such a way that it could generate its own lightning. And so when you have a day cloudy, it's a little bit hard to discern in this wide shot, but you can see about halfway up some of the clouds there. We'll take it over to the turn basin where you can see a little bit better the cumulus clouds that are hanging around. And the anvil cloud will essentially, anvil cloud helps extend the possibility of lightning coming from a storm that's a little bit farther off, having a presence dozens of miles away. So while it may look not so bad from our camera's vantage point, and errant anvil cloud could be quite problematic for any launch, not just a Falcon 9 rocket. Also of consideration for SpaceX, since it does recover its first stage booster, the booster recovery weather, as cited by the folks at the 45th Weather Squadron, was considered a moderate level risk on a scale of low to moderate to high. Winds were tracking between 22 to 27 miles per hour per meteorologist forecast as of yesterday. Coming into today, weather has improved slightly over the published forecast, but not so, not terribly dramatically. So still remains a watch item that folks are keeping an eye on today. A little less than 48 minutes to the planned T0. It's been a busy 24 hours for SpaceX as we're looking at this Falcon 9 rocket here. Want to pop over for a moment, call an audible to the guys in the back. If we can bring up pad 39A. You can see here another Falcon 9 rocket that is getting ready to launch on Monday. The aforementioned FRAM-2 mission, which will be the first time that a crewed spaceflight has launched into a polar orbit. So this free flyer mission will orbit the Earth in a trajectory that will allow them to fly over both the Arctic and Antarctic poles, a higher inclination than has been experienced by any other crewed mission, certainly in low Earth orbit. So lots to explore with this one, and the four soon-to-be astronauts who are flying that mission bring their own unique polar exploration experience, and adding the space perspective will be the next step in that process for them. As pertains to the Falcon 9 rocket and what SpaceX has been up to in the run-up to this mission, early this morning, they conducted a static fire test of that Falcon 9 you see there at pad 39A. The roughly 10-second or so burn of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket helped to validate the vehicle's readiness to support this crewed mission. Static fire test is something that SpaceX does routinely for its crewed flights, both for NASA as well as private astronaut missions, the ones that have flown so far to the space station on behalf of Axiom Space, as well as the launches of Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn in 2021 and 2024, respectively. FRAM-2 set to launch tomorrow, weather permitting. Hopefully, we'll be getting a launch weather forecast sometime in the next couple of hours to get a more decisive view of the weather outlook with tomorrow's launch opportunity, which begins at 9:46 p.m. Eastern with a 4.5 hour window that lasts until just before 2:30 on Tuesday morning, April 1st. But of course, because this is a free-flying mission heading up not to the International Space Station, but into that polar orbit that I mentioned, they also need to ensure that the weather is good for splashdown roughly 3.5 to 5 days post liftoff. And they'll be touching down in the morning time off the coast of California. So the weather on both coasts will drive the timeline for this mission. So right now, again, it's set to launch tomorrow evening. But if you hear about a launch slip because of the weather, don't be overly surprised. It's a tricky one to slot in and make sure it goes as expected. If you recall, with the launch of the Polaris Dawn mission, they had to shuffle on the calendar to the right a number of times for similar reasons. Bringing it back here to this Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline, or the countdown timeline, I should say, the sequence of events that we're looking for with a good countdown to T0 for this Falcon 9 rocket. We're coming up on the point at which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load here. Not only speaking, that happens at T minus 38 minutes for a non-Dragon mission. SpaceX does its poll electronically, so if it's in a good position to do so, it can do that readiness poll earlier or sometimes slightly later than the T minus 38 minute mark. But once the go ahead for fueling is given, tanking of the Falcon 9 starts at the T minus 35 minute point in time with the loading of RP1, a rocket grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. And at the same time, liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T minus 30 minutes is when SpaceX will start loading a cryogenic helium on board the Falcon 9's first stage. Same on the second stage, a few minutes thereafter. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. About T minus 23 minutes, second stage RP1 loading wraps up. Then at T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, we'll see the strong back chill down process get underway. That's when SpaceX is thermally conditioning the feed lines there at the pad prior to loading liquid oxygen on board the vehicle's second stage. We see this visually manifest as the so-called big vent here at pad 40. The timing for that starts around T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. That lasts about 4 minutes in duration, setting up for second stage LOXO to begin at the 16-minute mark. Moving on to T minus 7 minutes is when the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket begins. SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. That's important because it helps protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during that startup sequence. 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then about T minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back will pressurize for the retract sequence. Visually, this will start with the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, the large structure, which from our vantage point right now is being obscured by the crew access tower. That'll recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9 rocket. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. About a minute later, same is true on the second stage, at which point the vehicle is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, targeting 3:25 p.m. Eastern, 1925 UTC, or just shy of 40 minutes from now. And we do have a new updated T0 here. Liftoff of this mission now slipping to 4:37 p.m. Eastern. That is 2037 UTC for our friends around the world. We'll be adjusting our countdown clock, and there you see we are now back to T minus 1 hour, 50 minutes, and about 50 seconds. As we've been discussing during the opening of our broadcast, weather was always going to be challenging for this mission. And as long as SpaceX had not begun fueling the Falcon 9 rocket, they will have opportunities to slip through the countdown or slip through the launch window, I should say. Backup opportunities extend out to 7:10 p.m. Eastern. So, still more opportunities to shift the launch time for this mission, and as updates become available, we will, of course, pass them along to you. Once again, for those who may just be joining the broadcast and are taking a look at the countdown clock, SpaceX has adjusted the T0 planned liftoff time for its Falcon 9 rocket, adjusting to a launch now set for 4:37 p.m. Eastern, 2037 UTC. So we are currently at about T minus 1 hour and 45 minutes ahead of liftoff, assuming that launch time doesn't adjust again. Weather heading into this mission was forecast to be quite tricky. Certainly a change from what the weather was like this time yesterday afternoon, where it was sunny, a little bit breezy, now quite cloudy, with some rain pushing across various parts of Florida's Space Coast. If it turns out that SpaceX is unable to launch today, the forecast 24-hour backup opportunity does look notably better. Not the most ideal, but certainly an improvement. A 65% chance of favorable weather in a 24-hour delay scenario as opposed to what the 45th Weather Squadron forecast heading into today, which was just a 20% chance of good weather. That backup opportunity drops the threat of the anvil cloud layer rule, or the anvil cloud rule, but keeps both the cumulus cloud rule and the surface electric fields rule. Winds a little bit calmer in a launch scenario on Monday. Booster recovery weather also improves a bit. So we'll see if SpaceX is able to find a pocket in this less than ideal scenario we have here today. And we'll keep you updated if there are any further delays to the mission set to launch from Space Launch Complex 48, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. In the meantime, want to take a quick peek over at our live chat here. Want to thank our newest channel member, Stephen Strickland, one for joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level, but also for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that on both fronts, Stephen. Welcome aboard to you, and a welcome aboard to our newest gifted channel member. Glad to have you both with us. And to the gifted channel member, if you haven't already, be sure to thank Stephen in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Speaking of channel members, want to thank Joe Piano for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that support, Joe. He says, let's go Spaceflight now. And the Rocket Girl, also with a 20 Canadian dollar super chat. Thank you, the Rocket Girl. It says, 1 year ago today, I was at the Cape waiting for my first launch. I didn't know what a Falcon 9 or what SpaceX were, but I'm glad I was at KSC. To the 1 year of Eutelsat 36D and to Spaceflight Now, where I've been watching launches since. Well, it's fabulous that you've been watching launches alongside us now for a year plus, and glad you're sticking around and hopefully still enjoying rocket flights as much as you were that first day. Now at the top of the hour here on the East Coast, 3 o'clock Eastern, and a welcome in to all of you who are just joining us now. If you haven't been with us earlier in the broadcast and we're expecting the count to be further along than what you're seeing on the countdown clock, SpaceX has adjusted the T0 of the mission. Not stated a reason outwardly, but likely due to the weather conditions at the pad. And actually, we do have a new T0 to report 6:15 p.m. Eastern. 6:15 p.m. Eastern. We are adjusting our clocks appropriately. That is 22:15 UTC. As SpaceX pushes ever closer to the end of its available launch window today, which is 7:10 p.m. Eastern. Our clock now essentially at 3 hours, 14 minutes and counting. Given the large amount of time that we have between now and the planned T0, we're going to pull back on our active commentary during the duration of these next 3 hours and some change. Of course, we'll continue to keep this stream up and keep you updated with any further updates, but it'll be somewhat light commentary until we get closer to the 1 hour mark. Once again, as a reminder for folks who may just be joining in the live stream right now, as we're just about 20 minutes from the original T0 liftoff time, SpaceX has once again pushed further into its available launch window today. Currently now targeting a liftoff of the Starlink 6-80 mission with 28 Starlink satellites on board for a launch at 6:15 p.m. Eastern. That is 22:15 UTC for those around the world. The launch window today extends out to 7:10 p.m. Eastern, so they've got about an hour-ish of margin left to play with if they need to make further adjustments. Want to take a moment and pop into the live chat. Thank Walter Garbazik. Garbazic. Apologies, Walter, if I just completely butchered your name, but appreciate the very generous $20 super chat for being a channel member with us here on YouTube. Certainly appreciate the support at that level. Also want to send thanks to another channel member, Butterfly, marking 15 months with us as a member at the pad leader level. Butterfly says, my fascination with space, with my best space buddies, is never ending. We appreciate being space buddies with you, Butterfly, and with all of our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, given the notable extension of the countdown that we have here to the planned T0, we're going to go ahead and pull back to some lighter commentary as we cruise on through the next couple of hours until we really get close to being 1 hour out once again. And while, of course, the sounds of nature and the winds of the Space Coast are always wonderful to listen to, and we're not going to pull those back, but we're going to add in some space tunes for you to slow jam to and enjoy as we're, again, pulling back a little bit on the commentary for the next couple of hours. We'll be popping in periodically, though, to let you know about any further updates to the mission today. We're watching live coverage of the Starlink 6-80 mission. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. We'll be checking in with you throughout the countdown. Time now roughly T minus 2 hours and 45 minutes to the current T0 of 6:15 p.m. Eastern, 22:15 UTC for those around the world. Those just joining us, I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight now. SpaceX counting down to the planned launch of the Starlink 6-80 mission, the launch of a batch of 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board that Falcon 9 rocket. It's been a challenging weather day for SpaceX heading into this launch opportunity, with them having to push back the T0 a number of times so far. Again, currently targeting 6:15 p.m. Eastern, 22:15 UTC. One of the challenges that is being caused by the weather is not just the ability of the rocket to launch, but also some of the airspace considerations that are being made as well. Typically, when you have a rocket that's getting ready to launch, there are a series of notices that get put out both to mariners as well as to aviators, and that gives a rocket that's getting ready to launch a decently wide berth to have the airspace needed to conduct its mission. However, because the weather is less than ideal, not just right here at Florida's Space Coast, but near some of the major traveled airports like Orlando's International Airport, some of the diversions that would normally be allowed to happen are potentially being waived so that planes have some alternate paths to take if they encounter some bad weather along their planned routes. And that lack of dedicated airspace, because of the consideration of some of these planes, may cause some issues for SpaceX in finding a good pocket in which it can lift off. So there's a lot that's being juggled by SpaceX, by the FAA, by meteorologists as well, looking to find good enough weather for SpaceX to attempt a launch with the Falcon 9 rocket today. Once again, coming into this launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast just a 20% chance of favorable weather for a liftoff. So even if the planes aspect of all this wasn't part of the picture, it would still be a challenging weather day today for SpaceX regardless. In a 24-hour backup scenario, the weather outlook improves to about 65% chance of favorable weather conditions. The anvil clouds that are potentially plaguing SpaceX also are not a factor, according to meteorologists, in a 24-hour backup scenario if it turns out that SpaceX needs to scrub today's launch attempt. As of now, though, they are continuing to press forward towards that planned T0 at 6:15 p.m. Eastern, with the window lasting until 7:10 p.m. So still a good bit of time left to play with if they do need to adjust that launch time once again. As we're cruising on through the countdown, I want to thank the nearly 2,000 of you who are hanging with us as we're hoping to see the Falcon 9 rocket take off today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button. Share the stream, allow some folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank channel member Well Reasoned Superhawk for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that. Saying this is for the mods. Thank you for all you put up with to bring great launches and great chat time after time. Thank you for all you do. And yes, a big shout out to our wonderful moderators holding it down in the live chat, helping to keep things kosher for everyone to have a good time as we're hopefully getting ready to see the Falcon 9 rocket launch today. So thanks to Clistiel Lee, to Mark Otto, Rusty Shackelford, Rick Donner, Jeff Hansen, Astro Joe, I know was with us earlier. Not seeing him at the moment, but I think he's still here with us. You can see that cloud pushing in from the right-hand side of your screen. That's coming from the south, making its way, generally speaking, north over the Turn Basin. Not what you call a Chamber of Commerce kind of a day for launch this afternoon. Now targeting more of the evening time frame. As the live stream continues on, we're again in a bit of a light commentary mode as we're hoping to get closer to that T-1 hour mark, and then we'll pick it up with a little bit more frequency. But for now, we're going to turn you back to our space tunes, and we'll be back with you with updates as they are relevant. Of course, if there's another adjustment to the T0 time, we'll pop back in with that as soon as we know it. But for now, we're going to turn it back over to some space tunes and some views of Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Time now about T minus 2 hours, 15 minutes ahead of the planned launch of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. You may have noticed in the last several minutes across our various camera views here at the Kennedy Space Center press site that the rain has started to fall around Florida's Space Coast here, a little bit closer to the launch site. Time's still targeting 6:15 p.m. Eastern for a planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, 22:15 UTC for our friends around the world. Want to note that the most recent update from the National Weather Service in Melbourne here in Brevard County noted that they were tracking some increased storms, potentially trending towards being strong storms in the inland areas of central Florida through about 7 o'clock tonight. They note that along the East Coast, I'll quote them here, a few stronger storms will still be possible through late afternoon along the coast and coastal waters, but greatest coverage will focus inland through late afternoon and sunset, end quote. Some of the potential hazards that they're tracking are strong winds, potential for lightning. There's also a low tornado threat that exists to the west of the I-95 corridor. In some of those more inland spots, the National Weather Service is also cautioning that there may be large hail of up to an inch in diameter. Gusty winds trending between 45 to 55 miles per hour with a roughly 15% chance for wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. So when we were talking a little bit earlier in the broadcast about some planes needing to divert into the area normally reserved for SpaceX and the ascent of the Falcon 9 rocket, that's to potentially avoid some of those impacts that planes may be seeing as they're coming into or trying to leave from Orlando International Airport. Still quite cloudy conditions here on the Space Coast with the rain starting to settle in. SpaceX does have a launch window that extends out to 7:10 p.m. Eastern, 23:10 UTC if they do need to make any additional adjustments to the liftoff time today. Of course, we'll continue to keep you updated on any relevant changes to the schedule for this mission today if SpaceX does make any additional adjustments. There's also a Phase 1 lightning watch in effect for the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It's part of this ongoing storm system that is moving across the Sunshine State. Unfortunately, not a really ideal day for launch, but as long as SpaceX has not called the ball game today, we'll continue to stay live with you and provide you relevant updates as we cruise on through the countdown. We'll continue to keep the commentary a bit on the lighter side until we get closer to an hour away from planned launch attempt. So for now, we're going to return you back to some more space tunes, and we'll be back with you again with any relevant updates if there's change to the T0 or just to keep you apprised of what's happening from a meteorological sense on the ground here on the Space Coast and nearby. You're watching Spaceflight Now, live coverage of Starlink 6-80. We are currently T minus 1 hour, 28 minutes and some change ahead of the current T0 for SpaceX to launch the Starlink 6-80 mission, currently tracking that liftoff at 6:15 p.m. Eastern, 22:15 UTC. SpaceX has held this T0 now for some time, so fingers crossed that conditions are trending in a good direction, that they were able to hang on to that. Taking a look at the pad there at Space Launch Complex 40 from our turn-based camera. Want to give you an overhead view of the weather conditions as well, looking at some of the clouds that have been pushing through the area on this weather loop, some other weather data as well. The forecast heading into this launch opportunity was certainly challenging for SpaceX to get this Falcon 9 rocket off the ground, and that has been bearing out throughout the course of this afternoon. See some of the rain that has been hanging over the Space Coast here has begun to push offshore a little bit. Things are starting to dry out, but still quite a bit of cloud cover hanging around. But we can see some peaks of sunshine here. Taking a look back through the wide camera view. On board this Falcon 9 rocket are 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites that'll be adding to the mega constellation in low Earth orbit. When this mission is able to launch, it will be SpaceX's 36th Falcon 9 launch of the year and their 24th supporting their Starlink constellation. If SpaceX needs to make any further adjustments to its planned liftoff time, it has a window that extends out to 7:10 p.m. Eastern, 23:10 UTC for those around the world. And of course, it will keep you apprised of any further changes to the T0 if those come about. Certainly want to thank the 1,200 plus of you who are hanging on with us in the live chat. Been enjoying the space tunes over the course of the last couple of hours. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor, as we're hopefully getting close to being within an hour ahead of launch. You can click that like button, share the stream. That'd be very much appreciated. We're nearing the end of our light commentary period. We'll pick back up with a little more gusto as we cruise on in the final hour of the count. And of course, any other relevant updates that come between now and then, we'll go ahead and jump back on the mic and let you know what has transpired. For now, though, we're going to go back and let you listen to just a little bit more of our space tunes, and we'll hopefully have some good news to talk about as we get closer to being 1 hour away from the launch of Starlink 6-80, set to lift off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And we're now just about T minus 1 hour, 15 minutes away from the planned launch of the Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 on the Starlink 6-80 mission. For those of you who are just tuning in or perhaps tuning back in, I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Good to have you with us on this Sunday afternoon, a challenging launch weather day, but the T0 has been holding for some time now, so hopefully SpaceX, the FAA, and 45th Weather Squadron are gaining confidence with this current T0 time, and they can press forward with the launch of 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board that rocket that you see there at the pad. As you're hearing on our microphones, it's still a breezy day here on Florida's Space Coast. The winds were forecast to track between the low to upper 20s as far as miles per hour. There have been quite a few storms over west of the I-95 corridor, so some of those have been impacting us here on the coastline. But as you're seeing here from our turn basin shot, we are seeing more peaks of blue sky above the pad there. So hopefully SpaceX is gaining in confidence that they can find a pocket of good weather in which to launch. Now just about T minus 1 hour and 11 minutes ahead of the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Among the weather considerations that are still in place for Pad 40, a Phase 1 lightning watch remains in effect until about midnight tonight. Not a definitive deterrent in the same way that perhaps a Phase 2 lightning warning would be, but certainly a watch item as meteorologists are continuing to refine the launch outlook and make sure that they've got a good path forward to proceed with the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket in a little more than an hour and 10 minutes. To use a food analogy that I've seen some of the launch weather officers reference as far as the difference between lightning watch versus a lightning warning. Think about lightning watch in terms of, let's just say, a hamburger, for example. You've got all the ingredients that are laid out on your cutting board that are in preparation for assembly, but is not quite an assembled hamburger versus a lightning warning would be the fully assembled hamburger ready to go on your plate and be eaten. I know a bit of a stretch of an analogy, but essentially that's what we've got here. A lightning watch just suggests that the general ingredients for lightning impacts are in the broad area and may come into play at the point of liftoff. And a lightning warning means that lightning is within the immediate vicinity and it could have uh, more probable direct impact potentially on a rocket launch. Or for folks that are just out and about conducting business here at the Kennedy Space Center or at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Those phase one and phase two lightning watches and warnings are set out for all parts of the Cape, across KSC, and the Space Force Station. Local time here, just about quarter after 5. We have a new T0 to report from SpaceX. They are now targeting 7:05 p.m. Eastern, 7:05 p.m. Eastern, 23:05 UTC. We are updating our countdown clock to reflect the new time, and you see it there now. Back to T minus 1 hour, 50 minutes, and about 30 seconds. Once again, if you are just joining us here, assuming that we were less than an hour from liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, take a look at the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You see the countdown clock has once again been adjusted as SpaceX is targeting a new T0 liftoff time for its Falcon 9 rocket. 7:05 is the new planned departure time, which may be the last opportunity, as it turns out, in the launch window available. SpaceX had previously stated that the window closed at 7:10 p.m. Eastern, but its launch page now states that with the liftoff targeting 7:05 p.m., it says, quote, if needed, Additional opportunities are also available on Monday, March 31st, starting at 2:57 p.m. Eastern. So we'll have to wait and see, number one, if they are able to conduct the launch at 7:05, and if not, if there are in fact still additional possibilities that are just not being advertised on the launch page between 7:05 and 7:10. As we're waiting and hoping for the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket in about an hour and 45 minutes. Want to thank Monkey Tree Rob in the live chat for $5 super chat. Appreciate that, Rob. Some very kind words saying, T-minus time to thank Will Robinson and the complete crew for all you do. Love this page and diehard space fans. Sending those kind thoughts from Lake Fairview in the Orlando area. Appreciate the words, Rob. And thanks for the support. closing in on about an hour and a half before the planned launch of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 6-80 mission. This looking to be SpaceX's last attempt at liftoff before they run out of opportunities in today's launch window. You're taking a look at the loop of a line of storms that are heading towards Florida's Space Coast. You can see they're pushing in, really starting to build over central Florida, make their way towards the Space Coast as some other clouds clear out towards the Atlantic. Not looking terribly promising for a launch today, but of course we will continue to stay with you up through the point at which a different determination is made or SpaceX is able to thread the needle and allow its rocket to lift off. Back here on the ground, you see there are some patches of blue sky that are opening up. So, depending on the timing of those storms moving in, SpaceX may be able to find just enough of a window of opportunity that they can proceed with the launch today. If that is not the case, though, a 24-hour backup opportunity opens up with a window starting at 2:57 p.m. Eastern, 1857 UTC for those around the world. That launch would come in the hours preceding the planned liftoff of the FRAM-2 mission from Launch Complex 39A, assuming that all remains on track with that and teams have confidence in the weather, both at liftoff for the rocket and the Dragon spacecraft here in Florida, as well as splashdown 3 to 5 days after that over on the West Coast. So lots of moving pieces here for SpaceX and its customers over the next potentially hour and a half to about a day and a half now at this point. We're roughly T minus 1 hour, just a little under 13 minutes away from the current T0 for SpaceX's Starlink 6-80 mission. Appreciate those of you who've been patiently awaiting the launch and hanging out with us as we've all been hoping that SpaceX will be able to find a pocket of weather, allowing them to press forward with the mission. T0 currently still stands at 7:05 p.m. Eastern, 23:05 UTC, but as you're looking at the weather cycling through from the GOES East satellite, it is not looking super ideal for a launch this afternoon as one pocket of clouds pushes off. You've got another one that pushes in. Been raining off and on throughout the afternoon here in Florida, especially in Central Florida. So we'll continue to keep you apprised of any additional updates as they may come, trending towards uh, an hour ahead of the planned liftoff time. Of course, SpaceX will need to make a call on the start of prop load no later than around T minus 38 minutes. So, depending on how much things could potentially improve between now and then, we'll see if they decide to make a definitive decision ahead of time, if they feel like there's just not a path forward today, or if they'll let things progress towards the start of fueling tonight. Now, at the top of the hour here, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, as we are just a little more than an hour away from the final T0 opportunity for SpaceX in this launch window today. 7:05 is what SpaceX is currently targeting to try and launch its Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40. We're now T minus 1 hour and counting away from the planned launch of the Starlink 6-80 mission. Given that we're within the hour from this planned flight, the last possible launch opportunity for SpaceX today, go ahead and do a bit of a soft reboot of things here for those who may just be joining in. You're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of this latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast today with the help and support of the newest member of the Spaceflight Now team, John Pisani. We've also got our Adam Bernstein out working hard, making sure all the cameras have been safe throughout the course of this afternoon, heading into the early evening, as we've had some rain pass through the area here. If you're not already following the fellows on X, you can find Adam, or the photographer, Michael Kane, and John on their handles right here. Adam is at ABurn NYC, Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr., John is at John Pisani Photo, John with an H. And be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook. We're roughly 20 minutes from the point at which the SpaceX launch director needs to make the call on whether or not they're going to load propellant on board the Falcon 9 rocket there at Space Launch Complex 40 in pursuit of a launch attempt at 7:05 p.m. Eastern. If that go-ahead is given, then tanking of the rocket will start at T minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, and liquid oxygen will be loaded on board the Falcon 9's first stage. If you're just joining us for the first time in the course of this broadcast, SpaceX has been navigating some very tricky weather throughout the course of the afternoon and evening, taking a look at some of the radar data coming in and a look at the clouds that are currently pushing towards the Space Coast. A nasty line of storms has been popping up around Central Florida throughout the day and has made a launch up to this point nigh impossible. Series of storm warnings have been cropping up around Central Florida throughout the day. Most recently, there's a severe thunderstorm warning for areas including Kissimmee and St. Cloud and Campbell until about 6:30 p.m. Eastern, which is closer to Central Florida. Think around the area of Walt Disney World, for those familiar with the Florida geography. One other factor that one has to consider, in addition to just the launch outlook here at the pad, is also the impact that these storms and severe weather has been having to some of the major and regional airports around Central Florida, including the Orlando International Airport. Typically, when you have a rocket launch coming up, there will be reserved airspace around the pocket where the rocket's getting ready to make its ascent. However, because of the bad weather, that reserved airspace has been being utilized by some of the planes as they've needed to make diversions and just to have that space open and available to them in case they need to adjust their route and they're not stuck in bad weather. So some of those considerations being made by the Federal Aviation Administration, and it's been a tricky day to navigate between air traffic and trying to find a good pocket among all that to allow the Falcon 9 launch to move forward. Of course, it needing its own weather clearance before it can lift off. Coming into today's launch opportunity, there was just a 20% chance of favorable weather. Strictly speaking, just talking about the launch liftoff weather. booster recovery weather also trending in a not favorable direction. The recovery weather was forecast to be at a moderate risk on a scale of low to moderate to high. Just about 53 and a half minutes to the planned liftoff, hopefully, of the Falcon 9 rocket. Want to thank the little more than 2,800 of you who are watching with us live at this point. If you haven't already, you could do us a solid just by clicking that like button, sharing the stream, allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank a few folks in the live chat here. Welcome in to Karen Gervey, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Glad to have you with us. As a reminder, channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Also want to thank Gary Charles Aquaviva. Apologies, Gary, if I mispronounced your last name there, but certainly appreciate the $10 super chat. Thanks for the support. Once again, coming up at around T-minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director needs to make a call on the start of prop load today. But assuming they are able to tank the rocket and go ahead and send this Falcon 9 on its way, let's talk about where it's going to be going when it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Falcon 9 rocket going to be following a very similar flight pattern from what we've been seeing for Starlink missions for the last while here on the Space Coast. Once it lifts off from Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, the rocket will fly in a southeasterly trajectory once it leaves Florida's Space Coast. Following that green arc that you see here on your screen, the Falcon 9 first stage booster, which is planning to make its 17th flight on this mission, will follow that red arc at the point of stage separation and make its way down to the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. If successful, this will be the 113th booster landing for that particular drone ship and the 424th booster landing to date. SpaceX is working to certify not only its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece, but also the payload fairings that are flying on this mission. Fairing halves will separate from the Falcon 9 upper stage and splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. SpaceX has a recovery vessel out nearby, and once they are safely in the water and they can approach, they will scoop them up, bring them on board, and back through Port Canaveral over to the Hangar X site where they will be refurbished and turned around for future flights. Local time 6:18 p.m. and we do believe that SpaceX has gone ahead and scrubbed today's launch attempt of the Falcon 9 rocket. Just too many things that were up against them with this mission between the weather and the weather-related diversions that are happening at various airports in the area of Central Florida as a result of the storms that are pushing through around Central Florida. The next available launch opportunity for SpaceX is coming up on Monday, March 31st, with a window that opens at 2:57 p.m. Eastern. Of course, SpaceX is also preparing for the upcoming launch of the Fram 2 mission for soon-to-be astronauts that are going to be heading into a polar orbit, become the first humans to fly in low Earth orbit over the Arctic and Antarctic poles. Should be quite the free-flying mission, which will last about 3.5 to 5 days. That liftoff, weather permitting, set for tomorrow night. Again, looking for a takeoff of that Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 39A no earlier than 9:46 p.m. Eastern. SpaceX has a 4.5 hour window for that flight with additional launch opportunities for Fram 2 at 11:20 p.m., 12:53 a.m., and 2:26 a.m. on Tuesday, April 1st. The goal with Fram 2 as far as returning the astronauts back to Earth is to have them splash down off the coast of California close to the morning time when the weather will be most ideal. And coming back to the Starlink mission, the new target launch time is 3:32 p.m. That's when the window now opens. A slight adjustment from what SpaceX was saying the window tomorrow would be pushing a little bit later into the earliest opportunity. Again, liftoff now targeting 3:32 p.m. Eastern, 1932 UTC. With the launch scrub today, we're going to go ahead and wind down our live stream here on YouTube. Really appreciate everyone who was here today for the launch attempt, and we hope to see you back here tomorrow for the now planned launch of Starlink 8 or 6-80, I should say, with weather hopefully looking to improve in that backup scenario. Want to thank our wonderful moderators who've been holding it down in the live chat. Thanks to Calistia Lee, to Rusty Shackelford, Astro Joe, Jeff Hansen, Mark Otto, Rick Donner. Appreciate all of you for helping us out today. Thanks to our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions and to Chuck and Jen Briggs for being on the standby for hopefully hoping to see the rocket launch and help us with tracking duties. Thanks to our photography team as well, to Adam, Michael, and John, and Stephen Young, our Spaceflight Now editor, who's been running the technical operations today alongside John. Most importantly, I want to thank you for wherever you've been watching from, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Get some rest and get ready to tackle the new week with gusto and vigor, and hope it's a wonderful one for all of you. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. We'll see you back here tomorrow with whatever launch is able to move forward, hopefully starting with Starlink 6-80, continuing on with the FRAM-2 mission. Keep tabs on our website, spaceflightnow.com. Click on the launch schedule tab for any potential updates to either of those missions or others coming down the pike. For the team here, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.